Welcome everyone. This is class number 12, our final class in the 12-week series on Deaconess. I thank you for your loyalty and patience in making it through all of these classes. This class is ending, and the next classes being offered is a weekend, 2-day seminar, April 28th and 29th, 2012. And this is the basics of Egyptian Tarot. This will also be digitally taped and archived on the website. And this is being taught by Alan McRae, one of our instructors here at the Church of Light. Allie is a real craftsman, putting a lot of good attention into everything she does. So you'll want to participate in her class and get a good foundation in the Brotherhood of Light Egyptian Tarot deck. All right, there was one question that came in at the very end of last week's class from Glenda in Englewood, Colorado. She says, "Thank you again for your excellent presentation tonight. I am wondering, is there a specific time when one can observe these constellations more clearly in the night sky? Does each have a time where they are seen more clearly?" In answer to Glenda's question, the best time to see the constellations is during the time of year that is opposite of when the sun is in those constellations. So, for example, good time to see the summer constellations is in winter, when they're overhead in the dark of night. A good time to see the winter constellations is in summer. That's when you can see Sagittarius and Capricorn and Aquarius in the heavens. Likewise, spring constellations are best viewed in fall, and the fall constellations are best viewed in spring. So come spring and into the summer, we'll be able to see the sign of Scorpio in the heavens. And the same with all of the other decanettes. So knowing at what time of the year they fall by looking for them in the opposite season. For example, when the sun is in Taurus at midnight, Scorpio is visible on the zenith. And the Scorpio constellations, Deaconess, will be visible at that time. So there's an example of how to follow these. And with the zodiac constellations, which can be seen along the southern horizon, along the equator, and then start learning to identify the Deaconess. Some of them are very hard to see because of light pollution where you are, and a few Deaconets have no bright stars. But there are others, such as for the last 4 months, the Dog Star of Sirius has been, bright as can be in the heavens, and Orion has been quite visible. So learn some of the major constellations, identify the position of the Big and Little Dipper, Canis Major, Canis Minor, and start with a star chart measuring away from these constellations, and you'll be able to see them. If you live in an area that has low light pollution, it'll be more successful than in a large city. Actually, in Hellenistic astrology, there were only 48 recognized constellations. There have since the 18th century and on, there's been a lot of constellations added. But
So the Deaconets and the signs themselves pretty much cover the suite.
They do.
Wow.
That was the pantheon of Greek mythology to some degree. Another quote by Joseph Campbell. Myths are the clues to the spiritual potentials of the human life. This is especially true. All of mythology is telling stories, and Joseph Campbell's thesis, especially in A Hero with a Thousand Faces, was on how to interpret mythology and how mythological stories are always talking about the human journey. So we can certainly read them that way and draw great insights about what it means to be human, what it means to struggle to stay alive, what it means to be victorious. And it's even clearer, the spiritual potentialities of human life, when one applies these mythologies to their natal chart and actually looks at the deacanates as they tell a story about the spiritual DNA of that individual.
Probably a lot of these deaconate rulers would qualify as the heroes who got their call, had to break with society, go into the underworld or their testing period, and then bring back a boon to humankind, that circle of the hero's path.
All of, yeah, I mean, especially the main deacanates that we know of as heroes, such as Perseus and Hercules and Ophiuchus and others who were,
Orion?
Orion.
Did he do a hero's journey? He fought a battle.
Yes. So they're all the hero stories. But I mean, others are also signified here, such as Orpheus, as embodied in the constellation Cygnus or in the constellation Lyra. There's stories that are overtly obvious and others which are covertly obvious. So tonight's deacanates are on the Decanates of Pisces, the fishes. And we know that Pisces belongs to the element of water. Therefore, all three of these decanates have something to do with emotions and feelings and intuition and sensitivity and the psychic, unseen world and the interior life. Pisces is of mutable quality, so Pisces persons tend to be adapters, moving between the pioneers, which are the movable or cardinal signs, and the perfectors, which are the fixed signs. The mutable signs adapt and transform ideas. Now the key word for Pisces is I believe. And this being governed, the sign by originally Jupiter, the religious urges, and later Neptune, the utopian urges, Pisces are one of the signs of religion and spirit, and faith is an important element. If we look at the 12th house connotations, Pisces also tends to represent certain things in life over which we do feel powerless, but we have to respond to, primarily our sufferings, the areas of life in which we feel chained or imprisoned or restricted in some way, whether this is physically or psycho-emotionally. Pisces is, to some degree, our confinement. So we'll see that all of these three decanates refer to the religious fact-finding or truth-seeking of the sign, to the imprisonment of the sign, and to the connection to the unseen world that the sign of Pisces brings us. The first constellation we'll look at tonight is the constellation of Cepheus, which is the Pisces decanate and has both the Neptune-Jupiter rulership. The third is Andromeda, his daughter. Cepheus was the king of Ethiopia. Andromeda, his faithful daughter. This is the Cancer Decanates of Pisces, or the moon, representing the fair maiden. And lastly, the sex decanate is Cassiopeia, who was the queen of Ethiopia, the consort of Cepheus and mother of Andromeda. Together, they form an important story in the sky, and a story of mythology that connects with other constellations we've already studied, such as those of Perseus and those of Cetus, the sea monster. The first, the constellation of Cepheus.
Is this the only family in the sky?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Wow, how neat.
Mm-hmm. It is and it isn't. I mean,
Yeah.
it's certainly like, what we all come from, one big dysfunctional family.
Right.
And having recently regained contact this week with a cousin I've not seen in 42 years, I've really had to think, in relationship to preparing for this class, he's also a Pisces, as to the dysfunction in family and how family can be, what we expect to be the source of love, tenderness, and caring can be the source of so many of our, issues, problems.
You're talking to an active Al-Anon member here.
Okay. Preaching to the
Yeah.
choir, so to speak. All right. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. So the Cepheus, this king of Ethiopia, is the first 10 degrees. And that would be the solar dates of planets from February 20th to March 1st fall in this decanate. The symbols we have already looked at, being Pisces, Pisces, and Jupiter, Neptune. The description is a king with upraised scepter and whose crown is surmounted by 7 globes. Zane goes on later to describe those globes as being a septenary influence. And remember, in classic astrology, we had only 7 planets: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The key word for this decanate is verity, which means truth. And this is going to be very interesting. The Pisces decanate of Pisces, this Jupiter influence of the sign of belief in terms of how we set about both discovering and perceiving truth. And Zane describes the spiritual text or spiritual message for this particular decanate as it is above, so it is below. And that which is below is like unto that which is above. This was the axiom of Hermes Trismegistus. And so all of Hermeticism is based on this particular axiom. So let's talk about this constellation. This is what it looks like. In the summer, if you look to the night skies, and if you look north to the area of the polar circle, you can see Cepheus, which is a northern constellation bordered by Cygnus, Draco, Cassiopeia, Andromeda, and Canis Minor. So, going back, the stars of Cepheus form a box shape on which there is a triangle. And what you have to keep in mind is Cepheus has his foot on the pole star. So he's a circumpolar constellation. And from the perspective of the ecliptic, he's seen, circling the heavens upside down. kind of like that.
But everything revolves around the pole star, so he
Or
comes
around
right
the-
side up, right?
At some points he's hanging upside down, other times he's right side up. But we'll talk about that too with Cassiopeia, because that turned out to be part of
And
her.
the Dipper, they go around each other,
Mm-hmm.
around the pole star. Where is he in relation to Cassiopeia?
They're very close
That's
by.
one of the few that I can identify because it looks like an M or a W.
All right, when we get to Cassiopeia, I'll show a star chart which has him in the image right next to her. It's a much smaller constellation compared to Cepheus.
Okay. Oh,
And
there it is.
my eyes are not that good, but I would imagine it's over
Yeah,
here.
that's it. It says Cassiopeia.
Okay. So it's a smaller constellation and to the side. Another image. All right. In classical mythology, Cepheus is part of the story of Perseus and Andromeda. King of Ethiopia, husband of Cassiopeia, and father of Andromeda. And I won't give you all the story right now, since we've got 2 more constellations where we can slowly unfold this family drama in the sky. Now what Zane says in Delineating Horoscope about the first Decanate of Pisces, the Neptune Decanate of Pisces is pictured among the constellations by Cepheus, the king, whose foot rests upon the immovable pole star. He holds aloft a scepter cut from the tree of life, and his crown is surmounted by 7 globes, representing the 7 planets and the septenary law in nature.
There's 7 visible planets, so the ancients thought that's all there were for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even though there's 8 visible planets, because Uranus moves so slowly, they never identified it.
Is it visible with the naked eye?
It is.
I didn't know that.
You just have to know where you're looking.
Wow.
People born under this section of the sky are naturally interested in understanding nature, particularly in its psychic and spiritual aspects. They are mystics to the manner born and seek truth not so much through the methods of exact science and reason as through the exercise of their psychic faculties. They readily become seers and have a natural aptitude for grasping the esoteric interpretation of all phenomena. This ability to recognize the truth through the inner response becomes of value in the world of affairs in connection with secret service work of all kinds. They are detectives of the highest order, whether their talents be directed to social conditions or to the wider mysteries of universal relations.
My Pisces fellow born in this decade is a paleontology freak.
Okay.
He does that kind of mystery.
Yeah,
of
I mean,
nature.
that's secret service work in
Yeah.
a sense. You're delving
and
into
he's
the mysteries
fascinating.
of life.
Yeah, right.
Here's another image from Uranographia. Now, in spiritual astrology, Zane says, Cepheus signifies a rock, and the constellation in the sky designated by this name pictures the king of Ethiopia on his throne with 1 foot upon the immovable pole star, representing truth. Both Sagittarius and Pisces are dual signs, and both through Jupiter, which is the natural ruler of one and the co-ruler of the other, have some significance in matter of religion. Joseph, whose bow abode in strength, represents Sagittarius, the duality of which is symbolized by his coat of many colors. It is this coat which Cepheus, or Pharaoh, whom Joseph served so well in the land of Egypt, still holds in his hands. There it is. Here's a good image to answer your question, Cepheus and Cassiopeia.
Yeah. He's about to club her.
Yeah. She just made some trouble. Good thing he has that switch, that scepter. He goes on to say, Peter, of New Testament mention, is a name which, like Cepheus, means rock. And it was upon a rock that Peter was commanded to found his church. In the sky, this is, of course, the Rock of Ages, otherwise known as the pole star, which changeth not, the symbol of eternal truth. Cepheus thus not only represents Pharaoh, but in a later story pictures Peter, on whose foot or understanding, and Pisces rules the feet, must rest on truth, and who holds the key to heaven and hell. Curiously, the Catholic feast of St. Peter takes place February 22nd, when the sun moves into this first decanate of Pisces. And the throne on which Cepheus rests is in Latin called the cathedra. So the cathedra of St. Peter is, of course, in the Vatican. But our word cathedral represents the throne of the bishop in any particular cathedral or basilica. All right. Verity, which is the key word of the constellation, is an accurate comprehension of the facts and their relationship to each other. Such recognition of truth permits actions that make a successful adaptation of the life form to the conditions by which it finds itself surrounded. The keys which unlock the door of truth also, therefore, unlock the doors of heaven and hell. For action based on falsehood and deception, such as one side of Pisces governs, leads to discord and destruction, while action based on verity, which the other side of Pisces governs, leads to harmony and eternal life. This is a great icon of St. Peter. You can see him holding his keys. The golden key is the understanding of planetary law. For the character of each thing contacted is completely mapped by its astrological vibrations. The silver key is a duplicate of one of the gold, except that its action is feminine and passive, bearing the same relations to the latter that woman bears to man. That sounds a bit sexist, but we'll continue. In fact, the tarot is to astrology what the moon is to the sun. Astrology and the tarot are known to initiates as the two keys. They are the keys to verity, the real keys for which Peter is renowned. The text, therefore, is the Hermetic axiom, As it is above, so it is below, and that which is below is like unto that which is above. In other words, looking at the macrocosm and the microcosm. I forget which star Gazette this is from, but I really love this image. It's just all in red. Stands out so nicely.
Reminds me of the Fool.
You know, it does, the way he's walking. Though he's sort of dressed a little more like a Roman centurion, I think, than the Fool is. All right. And those last quotes were from Spiritual Astrology. Let's talk about verity. Of all the things I've been looking up lately, this had one of the simplest explanations. The state or quality of being true. Accordance with fact or reality. Something that is true as a principle, belief, idea, or statement. All right. I chose for my Cepheus the chart of Irma Bombeck. Some of you will remember her. I grew up reading her column in the newspaper and was always impressed by its truth. She had a very sort of homespun form of truth, but the verity here is described earlier. Zane describes these people as being detectives or sort of keen observers of human nature. And she was definitely that, but she was able to put these observations into a humorous form. And of course, any painful pill is made so much easier to swallow with a good coating of sugar. And I loved her her quote. There were so many quotes to pick from, but when I stand before God at the end of my life, I would hope that I would not have a single bit of talent left and could say, I used everything you gave me.
That's great. She's got that special opposition there between from. Oh no, wait. That is a Leo Neptune, not a Virgo.
Right.
Okay, never mind.
It may still be in opposition to Jupiter. Just telling.
And the Sun.
Yeah. From telling of one sign to the first degrees of the next sign.
Maybe that's what gave her such a good sense of humor through all that.
Well, I certainly think a Sun conjunct Jupiter in the first house would give her a good sense of humor.
But she also had compassion with it from the Neptune, filter, or it seems like she was able to, she was one of those people who took truths that would hurt, but made them humorous so that they were compassionate rather than searing.
Stinging.
Yes.
Yeah. Clearly a Pisces and not a Sag.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about her. I'm going to give you the little bio I've put together. American journalist and humorist from the 1960s through 1990s, Irma Bombeck was the author of 11 books and a column read by millions in 700 cities.
Wow.
Her work focused on suburban, homey wisdom. Some of her book titles include The Grass is Always Greener Over the Septic Tank, If Life is a Bowl of Cherries, What Am I Doing in the Pits? And A Marriage Made in Heaven, or Too Tired for an Affair.
She was fun.
She was funny, yes. She was born Irma Fist in Bellbrook, Ohio, and was raised in Dayton. After Irma's father died in 1936, she moved into her grandmother's home with her mother. Her mom was 16 when Irma was born, and they were lifelong best friends. Her mother remarried in 1938 to Albert Harris. From the age of 14, Bombeck knew that she wanted to be a humor writer. Irma attended the University of Dayton, where her English professor, Father Tom Price, commented to Irma about her great prospects as a writer. And she began to write for the university publication, The Exponent. Irma graduated in 1949 with a degree in English. She remained a lifelong supporter of the university, becoming a trustee in 1987. A newspaper reporter, she began writing a humor column in 1964 and was syndicated the following year. She quickly became a popular humorist nationwide. By 1966, she was giving lectures for $15,000 honorarium in the various cities where her columns appeared. Sorry about that. Sorry, I don't know how to...
Push the button on the side. The volume button usually kills it.
Didn't work on this one. Irma Fisk married Bill Bombeck, her childhood sweetheart, in 1949. They were married for 46 years. In 1953, she failed to get pregnant. They adopted their daughter, Betsy. She later gave birth to their son, Andrew, in 1955, and 3 years later, they had another son, Matthew. In 1971, the Bombeck family moved to the rural, mountainous community of Paradise Valley, California. She was known for such quips as, "Housework, if you do it right, will kill you." I have a theory about the human mind. A brain is a lot like a computer. It will only take so many facts, and then it will go on to overload and blow up. Dreams have only one owner at a time. That's why dreamers are lonely.
Oh.
Why clean the oven? If you can still get a cupcake in there without touching the sides, you're in good shape. Bombeck had a double mastectomy for breast cancer in 1992. In July of the following year, she suffered total kidney failure, which required her to undergo dialysis 4 times a day while waiting for a transplant. The life-saving kidney transplant came through on April 3rd, 1996. She died in San Francisco on April 22nd, 1996, at 3:27 a.m., less than a month after the operation.
Oh. Do you know what year that picture was taken?
No.
See those dark circles under her eyes?
Is that kidney?
Yeah. In acupuncture, that's a sign of kidney trouble.
We might be able to tell from the IBM typewriter what year that was.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this chart. Again, I already mentioned this sense of getting down to the truth, but telling it in a humorous form, is that her Sun and Jupiter are conjunct in the Cepheus Decanate of Pisces, and they're expressing through the first house of personality. So we could see how at age 14, this woman knew she wanted to be a humor writer. You know, she was clear on what her passion was, what her life mission was.
That makes me jealous.
You still got time.
Thanks.
There's a lot in Pisces in this chart, which actually makes Pisces the most powerful sign. We look here, we have the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus, and Uranus all in Pisces. Pisces has 21.9% of her power out of 29, did I say 29.1? I'm repeating myself again.
I thought you said 21.9.
Okay, then I stand corrected. It's 29.1.
And there's
So-
something in every decanate.
Yes, we've got Cepheus, we have Andromeda, and we have Cassiopeia in this chart. Father is Mars in the 4th house, and apparently he was a crane operator. So Mars certainly would represent someone working in construction or destruction, depending on what was at the end of that crane, a wrecking ball or a digging bit of some type. And that is her dominant planet, believe it or not. Which makes that original quote so interesting to me about wanting to use up every bit of her talent. Because that is Mars, burning the candle at both ends. Mars had 11.3% of her power, so Mars would make her, aggressive, assertive, and even though a Pisces, which we generally think of them as, what am I going to do when I grow up, and swimming in different directions, the Mars would have given her that sense of drive, focus, and the desire to just take action. It is involved in an opposition to Saturn, which could certainly represent the loss of father. And also the fact that when her mother remarried, it took her some time to warm up to the stepfather. It was something she didn't adjust to readily.
How did you say she lost her father?
I didn't.
I missed that.
I don't
did
remember.
Did they just separate, or did he die?
He died.
Okay.
Syndication. Pluto in the 6th house. It has to do with corporations reaching mass destiny. So her work touched many. And interesting, way back in the 60s, $15,000 per lecture. That's a boatload of money. You either have to get 1,000 people paying $10 to come see you, or 15 people paying $1,000 to come see you. So, but look at her 2nd house. This is the 2nd most powerful house in her chart, and this is the most harmonious house in her chart. It has 56.55 harmodines. So, could this woman make money? Yeah. And she could make... Yeah, I know. She has everything we want. Direction, income. Yeah, look at that. Mercury conjunct Venus in the 2nd house. That's great for having a charmed life writing. These form a trine to the midheaven and to Pluto.
Grand trine.
Yeah, there's a grand trine of Mercury, the planet of writing, to Pluto, the planet of syndication, to the midheaven, the planet of honor and reputation. Venus is forming a trine to the midheaven in the chart. She's out of orb from Pluto. But that's a pretty great combination to have as a writer and as a humor writer. Health. Well, she lived to what, 77? So let's see, 1996 minus 27.
Is Libra afflicted?
She
That would
lived to
be-
72 years, which,
Her moon in Libra, is that negatively aspected? Libra would have to do with the kidneys, would it not?
you know, it would. And it's moderate in strength and it's mildly harmonious. But there could have been a progression at that time, you know. Something.
And is that a semi-square to Saturn?
The moon forms a semi-square to Saturn, the ruler of her first house, the co-ruler of the first house. So there is an affliction here between the two of them.
That could relate to health.
Breasts are, of course, Cancer, which is mildly discordant, but in her house of health. The Pluto could also represent the radical treatment. Double mastectomy is one of the most radical treatments for breast cancer. But a funny, funny woman.
So she had Neptune in the 7th. What do you make of that?
Well, and it's opposing her first house planets. Neptune opposes the Sun.
And she stayed married to that man for 40-some years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it opposes her Sun. So
Probably
One
worked
wouldn't-
a lot with her emotions. through
she
her
probably
marriage.
did. One wouldn't guess that it was a flawless marriage.
Mhm.
Why? Because whenever you have Neptune in the 7th house, you tend to end up being disappointed by your choice of mate.
Because you're in love with love.
You're in love with love, you're in love with romance, or you're in love with the potential of the person you're with. And if they don't always realize what you view to be their potential, then you get disappointment. So, none of this we know, but this Neptune opposing the Sun may also have contributed to some degree to just the keen insights that she had about people. And being able to deal, a lot of her puns and quips deal with expectations of family, expectations of housewives. You know, and the truth is about what the expectation is and what the reality is.
Yeah, like that housework quote.
Yeah, and the oven cleaning quote. I would imagine she worked really hard. Writing is very hard work. And to come up with a weekly column, that's a lot of work. Also in her chart, Saturn and Jupiter are exactly square to one another. And these are the business planets. Yet, somehow, she was able to, we certainly didn't know what she made as her honorarium for speaking. I'm not sure what she made out of her books. But she was able to take a bad business aspect and translate that into something good for herself. The other thing about the Sun-Jupiter conjunction is philanthropy. And she gave to causes such as American Cancer Society, but also was an avid supporter of the University of Dayton, which is a Catholic university in Dayton.
I noticed when you were reading the dates that her kids were all happening by the mid to late 50s. And she didn't start that column writing until 1964.
She actually started writing beforehand, but once she and her husband decided to adopt the daughter, she then stopped work to raise her family. And so it was, perhaps 10 years, 11 years after the first child that she started working again.
And took up writing a column when she started working?
Yes.
So before that, she'd written 1 or 2 books? Or?
No, she had worked as a journalist.
Oh, okay. Do you know when she wrote the books?
I would have to go look that up. I don't have that in my memory, nor did I write it in my notes.
They might have helped make her column get picked up so quickly.
No, the column came first. The books were a byproduct of the column.
Okay.
Yeah. Once she became syndicated, people wanted more and more. So therein was the lecture circuit and the book writing.
Like the chicken soup book, she could have written it on any subject.
Exactly, she could have. All right, the middle decanate of Pisces is Andromeda, which is any planets from 10 degrees to 19 degrees 59 minutes of Pisces.
I have one more question about her. The fact that Uranus is in the last decade of Pisces there, and the fact that I don't know her writing that well, but she's humorously treating housewife-ish subjects a lot. Was she a feminist? Was she a revolutionary thinker for women, or the family paradigm?
She never that I know of, came forward to specifically identify as a feminist, and I think her approach in showing family paradigm was through humor. So she may have been all of those things without taking on the label, because immediately once you start labeling yourself, people respond to labels as either liking or disliking.
Maybe that was another thing she could couch through humor. Her kind of break people out of the paradigms, the boxes that they think in stuff.
Yeah, perhaps.
We hadn't mentioned Uranus.
Yeah, because we got bigger fish to fry.
Okay.
All right. The solar dates for this second decanate are March 1st through 11th. This is the Cancer Decadent of Pisces, which is a lunar influence. And of course, the moon always represents the feminine, and or in archetypes, which this class is about, the moon always represents the fair maiden or the compassionate mother. Now, Andromeda is a princess chained to a rock by the sea, which has inspired artists throughout the ages. And the spiritual text: he who sacrifices his own desires for the welfare of others draws down the divine fire from heaven, and with it kindles the highest potencies of his soul. This is what the constellation looks like. Now, Andromeda is a northern constellation, surrounded, of course, by the other players in this story. Pegasus, Perseus are all a part of the story of Andromeda. I believe that Alpheratz is the brightest star in this constellation. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that is. I love this painting by Vasari, the great Renaissance painter. All right, the story is, as divine punishment for her mother Cassiopeia's bragging, Andromeda was changed to a rock as a sacrifice to Cetus, the sea monster. She was rescued by Perseus, which is what's happening in this story. There's Perseus undoing her bonds. They married and had 7 kids. Here are some different images, many by the pre-Raphaelite painters. He was a strong archetype in that tradition, though this particular is a painting of Perseus and Andromeda from a villa in Pompeii. Here's what Zane has to say. Pisces, second decanate. The second decanate of Pisces is pictured among the constellations by Andromeda, the princess chained to the rock for the sea monster to devour. It symbolizes the earthbound condition of the human soul that passes to the spirit side of life, obsessed with the desire for material reincarnation. It also represents those noblest of all mankind who suffered persecution and imprisonment that the rest of humanity may prosper. So perhaps this is the Bodhisattva decanate in the zodiac. In Buddhist tradition, there is the concept that there are certain souls that come repeatedly to Earth to liberate mankind. Zane correlates Andromeda. There's almost a syncretization between Andromeda as being sort of the female Prometheus. The lives of persons born under this section of the sky are usually filled with restrictions and limitations. Often these conditions are assumed voluntarily as the price enacted by the world for the sake of assisting in its progress. When living at their best, they are readily impressed by those on the spirit side of life and are often chosen to carry out some important mission on earth. They grasp more readily than others the true meaning of universal brotherhood. And they get the most out of life through alleviating the physical and mental suffering of their fellow man. So that's from delineating the horoscope. In spiritual astrology, because such self-sacrifice has commonly been prompted by that sense of universal brotherhood, which the higher side of Pisces promotes, and because Pisces, through its 12th house affinity, relates to imprisonment and crime, the ancients placed Andromeda, the chained lady, in such a position as to picture the middle decanate of Pisces, where the sun may be found each year from March 1st to March 11th. The key word of the decanate, self-sacrifice, is set forth in the universal symbolism not only of the story of Andromeda, but in that of Prometheus also. In the case of Andromeda, the coast of her native land was being ravaged by the sea monster Cephus. This was through no fault of the fair princess, but had been brought on by the arrogance of Cassiopeia, her mother. Cassiopeia had incurred the wrath of Neptune, who was quite justified in resenting her claim to be more beautiful than the Nereides, nymphs of the sea. And Neptune, ruler of Pisces, had sent the sea monster to bring destruction to her land. Jupiter, planet of religion, was appealed to in an effort to save the country, and he decreed that only through offering her daughter as a sacrifice to the sea monster could Cassiopeia atone for her sin. Andromeda, therefore, not because she had transgressed, but to save her fellow man, her fellow countryman from death, was chained to a wave-washed rock in the sea for Cetus to devour. Yeah, the scary moment
The
in the
sins of the
story
mothers.
are visited upon the daughters.
Yeah.
When the critical faculties of Hercules, picturing one decanate of Virgo, more widely, what did I put in here? Yeah, Andromeda was not devoured by the whale monster. Instead, she was rescued by Perseus, her Prince Charming, and had a happiness she could not have hoped for had she not endured self-sacrifice. And while Prometheus suffered for a time for gaining fire by which those of earth might live in greater comfort, he too eventually was released. Kind Chiron, representing the higher mind of Sagittarius, ruler of the ninth and of public expression, volunteered to take his place, and still later Hercules killed the vulture, and he too was freed. When the critical faculties of Hercules, picturing one decanate of Virgo, more widely are brought to bear upon the suppression and distortion of information, we may be sure that the vultures who misinform the public will no longer be tolerated. We're all waiting for that.
Yeah, we sure are.
Hope springs eternal.
Yeah.
Furthermore, even while Andromeda and Prometheus were persecuted for their services to the public good, they were being amply rewarded, as all who endure misfortune for the benefit of the human race are always rewarded through building into themselves those qualities which ultimately would permit them far greater freedom in celestial realms than those who have permitted injustice to thrive unmolested. Thus does the text become, he who sacrifices his own desires for the welfare of others draws down the divine fire from heaven and with it kindles the highest potencies of his soul. So, that was from Spiritual Astrology by C.C. Zane. Let's talk about self-sacrifice. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Sacrifice of one's interest, desires, etc., as for duty or the good of another. I've chosen for this chart Harry Belafonte. You probably all remember Dale. Daylight come and we want to go home. And I love this quote. You can cage the singer, but not the song. The king of Calypso, Harry Belafonte, was an American actor and recording artist, the eldest son of Harold George Belafonte Sr., a chef from Martinique, and Melvine Love, a Jamaican housemaid. From 1932 to 1940, ages 5 through 12, he lived in Jamaica with his maternal grandparents. He returned to New York in 1944, dropped out of high school in order to enlist in the Navy. Upon his return from World War II, he joined the American Negro Theater in New York. While singing in jazz clubs, Belafonte became the king of Calypso. He recorded his first album, King, in 1956, selling over 1 million copies. His career soared. With his first major film roles for years coming in White Man's Burden, 1995, and Kansas City, 1996. In 1960, he won a TV Emmy for Top Musical Performance, and his films included Uptown Saturday Night in 1947. In 1948, Belafonte married child psychologist Marguerite Bird. They had 2 daughters, Adrienne and Sherry. They divorced in 1957. In 1952, he met Julie Robinson, an antique dealer and costume designer, and former dancer with Catherine Dunham. They married in 1956 and had 2 children, David and Gina. In 1957, Belafonte tried to rent an apartment in New York, a feat he found impossible when landlords discovered that he was married to a white woman. When Eleanor Roosevelt related his plight in her newspaper column, remember her? We looked at her chart earlier. He was able to find an Upper West Side apartment. He lived in the apartment for 50 years before selling it to Abigail Disney for $10.8 million in 2007. In April 2008, Belafonte married Pamela Frank. Throughout his life, Belafonte has been known as an advocate for civil rights and humanitarian causes. He was an outspoken critic of the George W. Bush administration. He was a confidant and advisor to Martin Luther King and served on the board of directors of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And in 1981, received the Dag Hammarskjöld Peace Medal. In 1985, Belafonte helped set the We Are the World recording session in motion. And in 1987, he replaced Danny Kaye as UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. Belafonte had prostate cancer surgery on April 8, 1995 in New York and has experienced a full recovery. He now speaks to heighten public awareness about this disease.
His last marriage was when he was 80. 2008, you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
You go, guy.
yeah, one can say you can find love at any time if your aspects are right, or if you're incredibly rich and famous and gorgeous.
Yeah.
All right. It ain't fair. Here's another Jupiter-Sun conjunction.
10th house, too.
The man had an astonishing career.
Yeah. And he had a joyousness about his performance, his public persona, despite the fact that he took up such serious subjects, being a representative for civil rights and all.
Yeah.
He did it with great joy.
He did. He did, and people...
Like Louis Armstrong.
People respected him.
Mm-hmm.
Because he also had a certain panache or elegance or quality about him that also sort of softened the blow for people. So, pretty interesting chart. I struck by, again, that conjunction of the Sun and Jupiter in Pisces and the incredible opportunity it brings to an individual. Like Irma, who was just born a few days before him.
Oh my, same year.
Same year. Though here's somebody who lived longer, though surprisingly with Saturn in the 6th house. opposing
Opposed
Mars.
Holy moly.
Could be good gene pool. You know, astrology doesn't tell everything, and so we have to look at the whole picture, and genetics are a part of that. This is the spiritual genetics. One also has physical genetics, and they truly impact, the well-being of our body. So he too had this stellium in Pisces, 4 planets being born at the same time as Irma, still had that Sun-Jupiter conjunction. They're just born days apart, and was a huge success.
And it has all 3 decanates of Pisces represented in his Pisces planets. Some people would say that Saturn on the descendant being so close a conjunction with the descendant might influence the 7th house more than the 6th even.
Yeah, we wouldn't say that in Hermetic astrology, but some people might. Yes, Barb?
Question, what about Saturn opposing both the Ascendant and Mars?
Well, yes, we've talked about that a bit in the sense of health. Yet, this is a man who has survived. As far as I know, he's still alive. And
He did have prostate cancer.
yes, Mars
Mm-hmm.
certainly looks like a sexual organ.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows, that big round thing might be a prostate gland. And it's opposing Saturn, the planet of Cancer. So there's one perspective. I don't know if he has suffered from upper respiratory problems such as asthma, pneumonia, bronchitis, but Mars is conjunct Gemini in the sign that rules the lungs. Gemini also rules the shoulders and arms and hands, so that could also possibly bring in some issues with that part of the body. But I don't know his health history. I really don't. The only thing I know about is the prostate. The thing with Mars on the ascendant, he's always appeared to be very fit. And Mars tends to make for, in an air sign, no less, a very sinewy, muscular body.
Hmm.
So even in old age, he doesn't seem to have managed to spread out very far. Yes, Barb?
Doug comments that Pluto in the 2nd house trines the Sun-Jupiter conjunction.
It does indeed.
It does, and certainly if we look at that as being real estate, the Sun is the co-ruler of the 4th house of real estate. I would say making $10.8 million on an apartment, which one would imagine back in the 50s he probably paid really a fraction of that price for. That's really good money-making opportunities.
Michelle put in that he's very much alive and still appears in public.
Great. Yeah. And to some degree, causes are governed by the 11th house. The 11th house is not only one's friends, but one's hopes and wishes and more public social activities, groups, clubs, organizations. The 11th house is second most powerful in his chart after the 10th house. I imagine this man has a lot of friends. A lot of very influential friends. Now, let's see if I can even pick out the strongest aspect of his chart is the Jupiter-Sun conjunction. After that is the Mercury-Uranus conjunction. So these are going to be prominent facets. Do you think he might be a radical thinker? With Mercury and Uranus conjunct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in that humanitarian way, that's Aquarius's natural house. So the causes for all humanity, for the public good, might fit there.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't choose some other quotes of his, or he might, you know, if it was still operating, be investigated by the Committee for Un-American Activities. Because this is someone who sharply criticizes U.S. foreign policy, especially in Africa.
Mm. And that Mercury-Uranus was the second strongest aspect, did you say?
Yes. The Sun-Jupiter has 14.85. This is a conjunction. If you look at it, it's only 8 minutes apart of a luminary and a planet in the angular 10th house. That is powerful. So what do we think of when we think of Harry Belafonte? We think goodwill about him. We think of him as being an ambassador of goodwill, the UNICEF ambassador. He was also a collector of art and primarily folk art. So, personal possessions, second house. Moon is the co-ruler, falls in the 9th house of foreign countries. Apparently he and his wife Julie had a remarkable collection of folk art. So, there you have it. Another great American. And I really loved choosing 2 charts that are just days apart.
Yeah.
Because these are both notables from a real generation. All right. Cassiopeia. 3rd Decanate of Pisces. So any planets from 20 to 2959 fall in this decanate. The solar dates are March 11th through 21st. This is the Scorpio Decanate of Pisces. Mars and Pluto are the sub-ruling influences for this decanate. Now, Cassiopeia is pictured as a queen sitting on a throne, clasping in one hand a braid of her hair. Usually she is shown in the other hand a palm branch or a branch of a tree. Now, the key word for this, when I started reading these lessons back in the early 70s, I did have to get a dictionary. No one in my family used the word vicissitudes. I, however, try to use it weekly. Vicissitudes are ups and downs. The spiritual text for Cassiopeia. Man may pass from this life to the next, even through death, with no greater break in his affairs than would be occasioned by leaving his acquaintances in one city and taking up his activities in another city amid a different group of friends. An interesting keyword for the very end, the very last 10 degrees of the zodiac, before we start a whole new zodiac again, going into Aries. So Scorpio is the sign of death. And it does represent that somewhat, the end of a cycle in this particular decanate of Pisces. Now, let's talk about this constellation. I mean, she can't be all bad. Chaining your daughter to a rock in the middle of the harbor doesn't make someone a terrible person, does it? That's what the constellation looks like. So I think you can see the W in here.
It's easier to see it in the sky.
Yeah.
I think the top star, that's such a faint figure, but an upside down figure. The top star probably in the crotch area would go to the belly, 2 stars, and then the heart, and then the arm. That makes a W. See what I mean? See that faint star further up to the left? Yeah, that.
Yeah.
Start there and make a W. 1. Okay, well, yeah, basically.
Nevertheless, the northern constellation of Cassiopeia is bordered by Cepheus, Andromeda, and Perseus, the other players in this story.
She looks spooky there.
We'll move on soon to a prettier.
It looks like another Bodhisattva figure, though. It looks very oriental somehow. That drawing.
Together, they form a story in the heavens. Cassiopeia, the wife of Cepheus, the king of Ethiopia, and mother of Andromeda, angered the gods, primarily Poseidon, through her hubris, or pride.
She's like a mirror, mirror on the wall figure, right?
Yeah, she is, to some degree, because, what did she say?
She was more beautiful than Poseidon's paramour.
Yeah, Aphrodite. So, that got everyone's panties in a bunch. And Poseidon decided, no mere mortal can start bragging like that. We have to correct this situation. So, what did he do? Remember the biggest constellation in the sky, Cetus? He sent that sea monster to ravage the coast of Ethiopia. Well, they didn't know what to do. So Cepheus and Cassiopeia went and consulted an oracle who said, I've got the answer to this. Chain your daughter to a rock in the harbor, let her be sacrificed to the monster. The rest of the country will be spared.
Cassiopeia and Cetus?
Cepheus.
Oh, okay.
Her
There it
husband.
says Cetus.
Oh. Well,
Yeah, it was hard to picture the monster helping to chain her.
yeah.
Never mind.
We call that a typo. It's amazing I got this class done in 3 days, but
Wow.
not without error. I love this image of her from the Ferrara, House of Ferrara in Milan.
Ooh, is that on a ceiling?
It is a domed ceiling.
Cool.
Yeah, and the walls of a room. Okay, delineating the horoscope. Zane says about the third decanate of Pisces. The last decanate of Pisces is pictured among the constellations by Cassiopeia, the queen on her throne. It is the sex decanate of the sign of imprisonment. Sex and prison, that sounds kinky. And mythology attributes the imprisonment of her daughter to the pride of this queen and her beauty. However, in another story, she is the queen who furnished her children with the ram that bore the golden fleece and carried them to heaven. I've never found that story. I believe that was Nephele that did that, but I could be mistaken. Therefore, we find those born under this influence to have eventful lives and to be capable of entering upon and succeeding in a wide variety of careers. It is the last section of the zodiac, and they seem often to recapitulate in their lives the events and conditions we expect from many other decanates. They are unusually adaptable, are likable people, and require excitement and change. They reach their highest value in psychical research and in adopting and advocating such a life as will prepare man for the existence after the change called death. The last decadent of the zodiac, where the sun may be found each year from March 11th to March 21st, represents the end of the cycle of physical life. Among the constellations, this point from which the transition is made to a new cycle is pictured by Cassiopeia, the lady in the chair, who with one hand removes the cloak, which represents the physical body, and with the other holds aloft a branch from the tree of life. One hand, physical cloak, the other hand, tree of life. The alternative revealed by this decanate, the key word of which is vicissitudes, is well set forth in the stories relative to this woman. As one queen, her inordinate pride, selfish ambition, and attachment to worldly honors caused her daughter Andromeda to be chained to the rock for Cetus to destroy. But in another story, she is the queen who furnished her two children, Helle and Phrixus, with the ram of the golden fleece, which was to carry them from danger into safety. Such spiritual circuit, among other things, permits of passing to the next life in full consciousness. Thus the text with which the circle of constellations closes is: man may pass from this life to the next, even through death, with no greater break in his affairs than would be occasioned by leaving his acquaintances in one city and taking up his activities in another city amid a different group of friends. Spiritual Astrology, C.C. Zane. All right, as I've already told you, I looked up vicissitudes, a change or variation occurring in the course of something. Interchange or alternation, as of states or things. Vicissitudes, successive alternating or changing phases or conditions, as of life or fortune, ups and downs.
You know, it makes me think of modern physics, because things pulse in and out of reality. You know, going from energy to matter so quickly. That's what reality really is. If we are finely tuned enough vibrationally, we can see how readily things pass back and forth in their states.
Yeah, there is an interchange going on. And then there's that interchange
Even
between
among
the physical
this
through death to
yeah.
whatever
Exactly.
form we take up next.
Yeah.
So, not so much to describe this passing to the next world, but changes of fortune, ups and downs. I chose the notorious Jimmy Swaggart.
He probably
speaking-
wishes things switched more quickly than they do.
Yeah. But I must say, in finding the quote from him, this one did address the next life. If I do not return to the pulpit this weekend, millions of people will go to hell.
That sounds like Cassiopeia's hubris.
It is hubris. Yeah. Wow. But, you know,
Wow.
thinking about hell, Mercury conjunct Saturn. Not saying that those of you out there with Mercury conjunct Saturn are all thinking about Satan or Saturn, but the inclination could be there. Let's talk about this man. Not from the same bolt of cloth as Irma Bombach and Harry Belafonte. The American author and televangelist Jimmy Swaggart has preached around the world, attracting up to $150 million a year. He masterminds his ministerial empire from a $30 million compound in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Still? Is he still active?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah. Swaggart grew up in Faraday, Louisiana, in the heartland of Pentecostal Christianity. He received his first message from God at age 8 while standing in line at a movie theater. As you can imagine, God was telling him not to go in. As a teen, Swaggart was a renowned hellraiser. He dropped out of high school and played honky-tonk piano with his notoriously carousing cousin, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh.
Great balls of fire. In 1953, at age 17, he married Frances Anderson, a 15-year-old farm girl neighbor, both lying about their ages. Swaggart began as an itinerant preacher in 1955, ministering from a flatbed truck and playing accordion. Too poor to own a home, he lived with his wife Frances and young son Donnie in church basements, pastors' homes, and small motels while earning about $30 a month. After graduating Bible College in 1961, Swaggart was ordained in the Assemblies of God Church. The following year, he was an itinerant preacher traveling the southeastern U.S. and began cutting gospel records, eventually selling over 150 million. He started a radio show that eventually led to his TV program. On TV, while soliciting money from his viewers, Swaggart became outspoken in his attacks on Roman Catholicism, Jews, and homosexuals. During each sermon, the impassioned preacher ranted and coerced his followers to financial support. In the early 1980s, he became a target of investigations. Probably a Catholic, Jewish, gay conspiracy. In 1981, a wealthy California widow left almost her entire estate to Swaggart Ministries. Family lawyers charged the Evangelistic Association and its agents with preying upon her loneliness for the purpose of securing donations. By now, Swaggart had a private jet and 3 homes. Further allegations of misallocations of money, death threats, handsome payoffs, and the exploitation of prostitutes led to private investigation. When confronted by photos of himself with prostitutes, he reportedly admitted that he had a fascination with pornography from childhood. This is the sex deaconate of Pisces. Further confirmed encounters with prostitutes sent him reeling into tearful, tortured, televised public confessions. This incident earned him a 2-year unsuccessful rehabilitation period and a 3-month suspension from his U.S. pulpit, after which Swaggart was back to preaching against sin.
Wow. So the price he paid was, again, several years of ostracization and no punishment, basically.
Well, the punishment was, of course, after a scandal like that, you do lose donation monies from your followers.
And face.
Right, you lose face,
But
except...
he never did a time or had any charges brought against him?
No.
Wow.
Yeah. So, what's going on here? Just to start off with the more salacious part of things, we could look to the 5th house. Taurus, Venus is the ruler. It's in conjunction with Uranus. So there could be sort of, unusual or unconventional amorous pursuits, if we look at it that way. Certainly, the continual thinking about hell and Satan, Mercury, the mind, is connected to Saturn or Satan in the chart. Though that's also an aspect that can bring in very good accounting skills.
Doug mentioned Jupiter, Sun, Pluto trine in water signs.
Jupiter, 23 Scorpio, Sun, 23 Pisces, Pluto, 23 Cancer. How's that for a grand trine in water?
To the degree.
Awesome. That is just awesome. These are powerfully harmonious aspects in his chart. And one can see how the power, wealth, and mass destiny combined here through televised preaching.
How do you get the wealth from?
Jupiter. Jupiter is always a wealth builder.
Okay.
That is his nature.
And the power from the sun.
The sun. And televised from Pluto, because it reaches everywhere, but it reaches the masses. Venus, Mars, opposition. Afflictions between Venus and Mars can sometimes indicate sexual improprieties. This can show up in the case of abusers or people who are abused. It could be something perhaps found both in the chart of a prostitute or a solicitor. And, generally, sex should be one's private business. But in this case, you have somebody who is sort of, pounding the pulpit against sin and is a very public figure, but is shown in some ways to be hypocritical. Yet, through all of this, remained married. Pluto-Moon conjunction.
Was his wife a visible figure?
I don't remember, I mean, I'm not somebody who watches his shows or anything, so I wouldn't know if she appears on it or not. I certainly know when the scandal broke out in the 80s, he's the one that was visible.
Yeah, I was mixing him up with somebody else who was busted for sex stuff, whose wife was named Tammy.
Baker, Jen Baker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the
Wow.
end of the class.
Oh, the class.
On Belafonte's chart.
You want to read it to me?
She said, could the moon in Aquarius in the 9th house contribute to his innovative thinking about social and political affairs?
Absolutely. The moon in Aquarius will create innovative thinking about humanitarian causes, social justice, and political matters. The fact that it's in the 9th house will make one outspoken about such things. Moon in the 9th house, if we think of the moon as representing the domestic urges of the home, moon in the 9th house is oftentimes represented in the charts of persons who have taken up a residency abroad. And he went to live with his maternal grandparents for several years in Jamaica. Search through www.churchoflight.tv and if you've not done so already, attend some of the other archived classes that we have there, because there's plenty of things to keep you busy and still on the learning track while I'm not here teaching this live. All right, thank you for attending, and hopefully see you in May.
Thank you, Christopher.
You're welcome.